Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of Corel, Ghislaine, and adjacent places, I guess. Anyway, this is me talking about the first couple of chapters of part 2 of Forge of Darkness. I'm glad I can do it because for a moment my camera stopped working, but apparently it still works, so let's hope this all goes through. Anyway, let's do it. Cheers. So, yeah. I read chapters 6, 7, and 8 today, and I do have some thoughts on the matter, I guess. And I feel like once again, like the first, at least chapter 6, when we see about Orphantals leaving and things like that, I feel we're once again in that point where we are talking a lot about childhood, how it works, how the impressions that one gathers in childhood have an impact on what happens in later life and stuff like that. And on the one hand, I feel like this is just a thought, right? I think it's sort of thematically appropriate because when we're looking at the overall what happens in Forge of Darkness so far, this is like the early days. This is still sort of the childhood of the Theist people. And this is like one of the things that I didn't talk about yesterday. And I feel it's important to actually be aware of the fact, like, this is not yet Corel Ghislaine as we know it from, like, the Malazan Book of the Fallen. This is not yet fully darkness, right? We're talking about the sun all the time. There's no Theist Andy and Theist Leosan and whatnot. These are just Theist. That split has not yet happened at this point. Another thing that I noticed later on is, like, magic is not exactly that far spread, right? There's, like, apparently the Azathanai have some kind of magic. We'll see other people that can use some kind of magic there. But this is like the early beginning, and a lot of the stuff that we know from later on, that we that we expect from the Malazan world, has not yet happened, not at all. And this is something I feel is important to be aware of, right? This is something that we need to keep in mind. And I found this very interesting. Like, yes, this is just medieval fantasy in a way. It's medieval fantasy that deals with a lot of the things that medieval fantasy doesn't deal with so much, and I feel it does a really good job of it because it focuses on more like societal issues and things like that are important to talk about, and doesn't get bogged down with the ideas like of getting the armor accurate and whatnot. Although it still obviously gets a lot of the details when it comes to riding, horse treatment, shit like that. It gets much like gets much more accurately compared to like other medieval fantasy because Steven Erickson just knows his horses and his fencing and stuff like that. One of the things that I found really interesting there is when Orphantal gets on the horse. And this was super interesting to me. When Orphantal gets on the horse, and the horse is like an old horse and it's half blind, on one side it's blind. It's like, I've ridden a horse that was blind on one eye. And yes, that's exactly how these things are. You need to be aware on which side they're blind and which, because they're gonna shy on that side, and they're like, I'm not gonna say that it was smart for a then also almost blind dude to ride a half blind horse and gallop with him over like fields. That's not, well, that's not the point. But I'm just saying, like, even that kind of thing, that detail, Erickson gets it right, and I love that. That's just like glorious, and it made me happy in a way because it also made me nostalgic of that time when I did, you know, gallop over fields on a horse, which is cool. So there's that. All right. What else? Once again, we're talking about a lot about these ideas of rigid power structures that are part of a feudalist society, and we see that is something that happens a lot in Kureld Galen, at least. And we see these rigid power structures, and this is like the important thing that rigid power structures are one thing, tradition is one thing, but it also, and this is the terrible part about it, because like having a rigid power structure that works well wouldn't be that bad. But the problem is that rigid power structures will always be abused by those in the middling ranks of that power structure, because they take out their frustration for not being on top on people below. And we see that when Sanderleth comes to Dracona's home, and that housekeeper is trying to fuck her over. And that's exactly that kind of thing we see there. Now, it's easy to say, oh, she's a terrible person. What an asshole. But it's way more important to actually look at, like, why do people become like that? And people become like that because they're bound up in a strict hierarchy, in a strict power structure that trains them to take all the frustration of being punished or ruled by people above their station and pass it on to people below their station, and see their position in a hierarchy as the be all end all of their life. So they're like trying to, get these things, get as much out of it as possible, and maybe trick or don't behave honorably or whatever. So that undermines the idea of a power structure in general. There's that. What else should we talk about? Civilization as a problem with the Jakut and possibly everyone else. Yeah, there is something to that. I mean, we've already seen, and I found it like super. Like, I'm getting derailed, but anyway, I find it super interesting that now that I'm aware of Stephen Erickson's, I don't want to say obsession with like environmental damage, overhunting, and so forth, and something that I picked up on my recent reread. I'd kind of ignored it before for whatever reasons. You see signs of that everywhere. It's all the time. You look at the Teist lands, and it's all like, yeah, we we hunt, and I find this, and there's overhunting, there's environmental destruction, the forests are chopped down, all of that shit, all the fucking time. We have these small details, like, yeah, there was a beautiful forest, and then it got chopped down, and then the soil died, because obviously, like, you need trees to keep like actual soil on the hills, and avoid erosion and shit like that. That's how it works. And us as sentient people, or in this case, obviously they're Theist and not human, but you know what I mean. Us as sentient people need to understand that, and we tend to just ignore it. We've tended to ignore it for a long time. It's like we're still doing that. It's like we were using goats in, I don't know, the Sahara. Goats are like killers of the landscape. Anyway, not where I wanted to go with this. I just got derailed. Anyway, what else? I just had something that I really wanted to talk about, and then I got confused. Yeah, hunting. The conversation about hunting that we have in that chapter 7, I think. The idea that hunting is necessary, or was necessary, when we relied on hunting for food resources, but that it has become ritualized, and by being ritualized we connected with, it's like a rite of passage, and we have these illusions of it connecting us to life and so forth. Like, I will be completely honest, I've never hunted. For a lot of reasons, I'm not sure if I could ever do that. But I don't got, but it just reminded me, because I just finished the crippled god like last week. We have that conversation with one of the Forcrow Assail forgot her name, and Captain Gano's Paran about hunting in the Balkan, not Balkando, in Kalans with the Kalansi king, and him like feeling one with nature and so forth. And I just found it interesting to see that echoed in that argument or those thoughts on hunting here in Forge of Darkness, because it's basically the same idea. It's like we build up the idea of hunting as something of a challenge, and it literally almost never is a challenge because we have all the knowledge, we have the technological advantage, we have like higher firepower and so forth. We're safe. It's not Hunting is not a contest between two equals. And this is stated really clearly there as well, because like once like we as a species you know reached a certain level of sophistication, hunting was never an equal, like a contest between equals. And the illusion that we build around that and anchoring that to a rite of passage is, yeah, it's weird. Now, rites of passage and stuff like that is sort of the next thing that I wanted to talk about for a moment. That being the old guy from the Hust Forges. I'm not good with his like first name. With the old one, Hustain. I don't know. As I said, I'm not learning. I'm learning names. Point is, when he talks about like before actually talking about making the sword for Anamander, the point is that I'm trying to look at here is his like idea of that he is going to be a child again. And there's like two things there that we need to talk about. The one thing that we need to talk about is that this is like a very interesting treatment, or at least like the start of a treatment of the like crazy and like hugely important and still way under acknowledged problem of dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or whatever. Like the idea of losing our memories and so forth as an illness. It's something that we rarely see in fantasy books. So having it sort of brought up there in this like reduction of a person to a childlike state by taking away memories and stuff like that, I found very interesting and tragic in a way. But it also becomes that, and like what he says, like we have two people in us. We have like a child and the grown-up person, and they're always constantly fighting. And I found that a very interesting thing from a societal point of view, because this distinction between childhood on the one hand and adulthood on the other hand is, or has always been, something of an arbitrary distinction, right? That's why we need something like a rite of passage, like rites of passage, because those are singular events that tell people that go through those rites of passage that they are have now crossed from that one state to the other state. There's no going back. And we as a society, us as a society, not so much Theist, obviously. Although I'm not sure if how much that is part of Thai society still, but we have very much done away with a lot of those rites of passage. It's like in more secular countries, you don't have those religious rites of passage, like first communion, confirmation, or whatever those, depending on your religion. But in a more secular country, those have gone away or are no longer important. For a lot of countries, like military service was one of those for a long time. It's like you're 18, you leave school before you go to university or do anything else as a job. You got to do your 2 years of mandatory service in the army. Now, obviously, there's still countries that have that, obviously. But a lot of countries don't have that anymore. And these are all like societally enforced rites of passage that clearly mark the change from childhood to adulthood in a way. What has happened is that those meld into one. which I'm not going to say if that's good or bad. I think it's I'm totally enjoying being a man child, but that's me. I'm just saying that this is something that idea that like childhood and adulthood are clearly distinct is a very important notion of how we look at like development of people. It that there are clear cuts, and that might just be the problem when once we deal with people who suffer from dementia, where we sort of like look at like have they like gone back on their developmental like level or whatever, or is it a change into something else again in a way. No, I'm no expert whatsoever. Just like I just know from like personal experience, like family experience in a way that at least the fear of losing memories, because memories and experiences are what make up our personalities, at least a large part of our personalities and identities. So the fear of losing those, at least in that stage where you are still aware of losing those, must be one of the like is one of the hardest things that happen, because once again it comes down to that idea of like losing agency, losing identity is on the same level. We want to assert who we are, and if we don't even remember shit, then that's basically impossible, and that attacks a person on a much deeper level than a lot of other things, I suspect. So yeah, will be interesting to look at how that progresses and what comes of that in the future, I guess. Um, what else will be interesting to look at? Um, I guess we should look at Farron and Arathan for a while, at least for like what comes of all of this. And I want to, step back. It's not about the sex there, at least not anymore. I mean, I said yesterday that I really appreciated the way that first sex scene was written. I still do. The way we're now talking about needs is a very interesting thing that I feel is super weird and difficult, because I'm obviously not one of these people in any of these situations, but the idea that we have, I mean, obviously I have had like weird needs and shit like that as well, but the need of a mother that has lost her son to replace that son by or child by having another child, on that being portrayed as something of a biological need. It's sort of a conscious and subconscious need at the same time. I want to focus on that because I feel that's sort of where it gets interesting, because there was one sentence in there. I'm damned if I could still quote it, but it is about the fact that there comes some level of self-control or agency from being aware of a physical need and making it also a conscious, rational need, because you kind of assert control. You're aware it's a physical need, but you say, yes, I also want that. I consciously want that. And that's how you own it up and reassert control over yourself in a way. So I found that interesting. Um, Another thing that I, found interesting there once again is the idea of like the sheer brutality of a feudal society. And yeah, I'm gonna come back to that again and again, on like how medievals this one feels compared to the Malazan Book of the Fallen, because it does in a lot of ways. Um, but the main thing here is the power, once again, that Draconis has over his subjects. This being a very absolute power, and in the end, I guess that's like the point with power, right? It is the power or the opportunity or the possibility to make decisions for others. That's how you measure power in a way. To assert your will on the universe, as you will. But he has that absolute power, and he uses it in a very cold and calculating way without explaining himself. And I'm pretty sure this will come back to bite him at some point. Bite him like a certain sword edge at some point, that he's not explaining anything. Now, I know that explaining ourselves is not always our strength, so I have sympathy for him here. Yeah. There's that. Now, what was I going to say? But yes, he just when he forces an end to that affair or whatever you want to call it between Farron and Arathan. That is a very clear expression of that feudalist powers that you have in society. And you know what I found really interesting? I didn't talk about yesterday. When Segunda loses his leg, that would never have happened in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. That's sort of where I realized that we're in medieval times. Basically, it's like there's no healing magic. It's not. No, his leg is broken. There's bone sticking out. We gotta cut it off. And there's a fucking elder god standing next to it. It's like, oh, yeah, just cut it off. Which, fucking hell. So what else? Um, I love how Azathane, or however you pronounce that, are all about drinking. When Grizin meets Kaladin Brood and they just polish away those jugs of wine. I love that conversation. I also love the fact that I now know that he's the father of both Setchulath and Erastus. And they're already off doing dumb shit, and Erastus is egging it on for just like, why not? So, yeah. Kind of made a lot of sense and explains a lot about how they're later on. But that same with how and God, I'm already losing her name again. Orias? I don't know. Is she the person who everyone thinks may be connected to Quick Ben? Because I think right now that she might be. But since that's all speculation, I'm not going deeper into that. I just love that discussion about how physical wealth and physical, yeah, like money and riches and so forth are not the same as actual riches and actual wealth in a way, or are just symbols and not the actual thing. That distinction between this being symbolic, and the actual values are being something else, is obviously a philosophical debate that I'm not going to have here right now because I'm a bit too woozy in my head for all kinds of reasons. But yeah, I love that discussion about, because it once again comes to this like, so what are real riches? And it's like, yeah, real values are truth and the highest one, the outstretched hand, compassion. I've heard it's kind of about that. So yeah, there was that. What else did I want to talk about? The idea. Oh right, the idea of Kataspala when he's like talking with himself about art and artwork, and it's being very much about the artist, at least as much about the artist as about the person portrayed. That one I found really interesting. The idea that art is always warfare in a way, that you like suffer for portraying things in specific ways. I really appreciated that. That was a really interesting thing. Also, the point where we realized that Urisenda, is that his name? I think so. Osirk's father, who I guess will be Father Light, but I'm not hedging my bets on that one. So that dude not really wanting to actually become to marry Mother Dark. I don't know. That's interesting to look at in the future. So yeah, oh gods, these were all like rather rambly thoughts all over the place. I'm sorry, I'm not the most clear-headed today. I guess I'll just leave it at that for today. Although hey, we saw the first dragon, and right, we need to talk about that. Right. Um, First of all, Therese. Now I'm listening to the audiobook, so I don't know how to spell, but is that the Queen of Dreams? I think she might be, and I kind of like her. Also, the sheikh, being in monasteries and so forth. I have a problem that I'm not sure how to solve because are there gods in Kharkanas, or at least like in this world at this point? Because I don't think there are. I mean, I think like Mother Dark is kind of building up to becoming someone that is worshipped, but apart from that, and we have discussions about gods and goddesses and so forth, but it's like there are none. So who are those people in those monasteries worshipping? And then I thought about that for a moment. And I'm like, well, this is sort of where language hits like specific, like hits like walls, because we connect ideas like monasteries with religion, with a faith that requires a god. But how do we describe an organization that follows like the same rules, like a, a certain level of asceticism and devotion to a specific lifestyle, specific aspects of life, study, and so forth, but without the religious aspect? Is there a way to do that? And the answer is like probably not, unless you invent a new word. Why would you invent a new word? Because new words, complicated jargon, make fantasy books less readable, less accessible. So we have a certain trade off between language that has connotations in our world that it maybe doesn't have in a fantasy world. And what we like, the trade off is that there is a certain level of breaking that fourth wall. Because, yeah, I had that wave earlier in when I was talking about like either Dust. I think it was Dust Dreams still. Yeah, it was still Dust Dreams when I was talking about Dust Dreams, and someone saying quick Ben. The quick comes from quixotic, and like quixotic is a word that is related to a novel written in the 17th century in this here on this here planet. The word quixotic shouldn't exist in the Malazan world unless Don Quixote was actually released there, which who knows. But yeah, so it kind of brought me back to that point that we use specific concepts and words that have connotations in our world, and then we kind of like get more flexible in our minds actually when it comes to that, and realize that we need to bend the rules in a way. It's like, yeah, we need to talk about the like a monastery even if they're not worshipping. And Neil Stevenson does something similar in his book Anatheme, although he uses a word for these monasteries basically because they're also not worshipping anyone, but they're just like living in these monasterial communities in a way, monastic communities. But I still find it interesting that there is the notion of God within Forge of Darkness at this point, but only on an abstract level. There are no gods so far. There's no gods mentioned yet. I mean, yes, we've met a few people that will become gods or elder gods even in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, but right now they're just people. Draconis is just a dude. A weird dude who certainly could work on his like role as a father. Things like that. We have Erastus, who will become the errant, and he's already the son of a bitch he's going to be later on. I mean, he's already the asshole he's going to be later on. Setchel who's already the follower he's going to be later on. We get all of that, but yeah, how to say? There's no gods. No one is praying to anyone yet. So how can people talk about the idea of gods on a theoretical level? That's what I want to know. Maybe I'll find out tomorrow. We'll see. If I do, I'll let you know, because this, I guess, is the end for tonight. And I'll talk to you tomorrow about a lot of other stuff and the rest of part 2 of Forged Darkness. Until then, cheers.